China's silence today mattered more than all the speeches. That is my starting point. Iran said it would not send negotiators to Pakistan for the second round of talks. The ceasefire clock is running down. The Americans flew to Islamabad anyway. And China, the one outside power whose oil purchases keep Iran breathing, whose diplomacy keeps Iran from full isolation, whose connection to the seized ship is obvious to everyone watching, said nothing. Most people hear silence and assume there is nothing there. I hear silence in a war like this and assume the opposite. I assume a decision was made, because in great power politics, silence is never just absence. It is choice. And the first thing that choice tells us is that the real problem here is not stubbornness. It is trust. The whole public framing of Iran's refusal is wrong. The press is treating it as bad faith, delay tactics, or diplomatic theater. But Tehran is not acting out. It is acting on memory. Round one in Islamabad lasted 21 hours. It was the highest level direct U.S.-Iran meeting since 1979. The most important thing that came out of it was not a breakthrough formula. It was the blunt admission that Iran does not trust the other side. That is the core issue. America signed the nuclear deal and tore it up. America publicly talked about progress and then shifted the terms. Trump implied Iran had basically agreed. Iran publicly denied that. Then, while diplomacy was still supposedly alive, America seized an Iranian cargo ship that had originated in China. If you are Tehran, what exactly are you supposed to conclude from that sequence? That Washington is negotiating in good faith, or that diplomacy is simply being used as a political wrapper around continuing coercion. This is why Iran's refusal is not trivial. It is strategic. And there is another complication that people still refuse to state clearly. There is not one Iran in this story. There are two. There is the Iran of the diplomats, the Iran that still wants some form of agreement because it knows the next phase of war could be even harder to survive. And there is the Iran of the IRGC, the security state, the Iran that saw the ship seizure and heard only one message: America still thinks force matters more than trust. Those two Irans are not speaking with one voice. One official says no travel. Another suggests maybe the team still comes. That is not noise. That is an internal battle. And China knows exactly that battle is happening, which is why its silence is so meaningful. Beijing has been the most important outside actor in this war, not because it entered dramatically, but because it built the structure that keeps Iran from being broken. Start with oil. Iran was supposed to be isolated. Instead, it kept breathing. How dark fleet shipping, spoofed identities, ship transfers, relabeled cargoes, non-dollar settlement channels. Chinese refiners willing to keep buying that system does not make Iran safe. It makes Iran unbroken. And in wars like this, unbroken is enough. Then there is diplomacy. Washington wanted clean enforcement mechanisms around Hormuz. China and Russia blocked them. Washington wanted cleaner international isolation. China prevented it. And beyond that, China sits inside the wider intelligence and commercial environment in ways that matter. Even when Beijing says little, it shapes the strategic field. That is why Wang Yi's call last week was so important. China pressed Iran to open Hormuz. Iran did. Trump celebrated, oil fell. The market took it as the first step towards something larger. Then America kept the blockade logic alive. Iran tightened. Again, the Americans seized the ship, and China said nothing. That is the key sequence. China asked for movement. Iran provided movement. America did not convert that movement into trust. It converted it into another demonstration of force. Then Beijing went quiet. That quiet is not indifference. It is calculation. If China publicly protests the seizure, it drags itself into a direct confrontation with Washington before a summit both sides still want. If China publicly pressures Iran back to the table, it assumes ownership of whatever comes next. If the talks fail again, or if Washington shifts the terms again, Beijing shares the blame. China does not want responsibility. It wants leverage. It wants credit. If a deal emerges, it does not want to become the guarantor of a process it cannot control. So it says nothing. And Tehran reads that silence exactly the way you would expect. Our refusal is acceptable, not endorsed, not blessed. Structurally acceptable. That is what I mean when I say silence can be louder than speeches. China's silence tells Iran that Beijing currently prefers ambiguity to a rushed agreement on Washington's terms. And why would China prefer that? Because a clean deal would reduce Chinese leverage. A broad agreement means sanctions relief. Sanctions relief means Iran regains wider market access. Wider market access means less dependence on Chinese channels. America gets to say its tools still work. The war winds down in a way that restores American credibility more than Chinese influence. That is not Beijing's ideal outcome. Beijing's better outcome is a long, expensive, unresolved war that weakens America, keeps Iran dependent, preserves China's role as indispensable buyer and quiet protector and allows Beijing to look responsible without actually sacrificing its relationship with Tehran. That is why the current state of the war may suit China better than a clean agreement does. Unresolved, costly for Washington, survivable for Tehran, useful for Beijing, and hanging above all of it is the Trump Sea Summit. Every Chinese move is being weighed against whether it makes that summit easier or harder. A loud protest over the ship raises the temperature. Pressuring Iran too hard reduces Beijing. As leverage, silence avoids both costs. That is not passivity. That is prioritization. Now, of course, Washington's position is not imaginary. The pressure is real. The blockade is real. Iran's economy is under severe strain. Iran did come close to a deal in Islamabad. Washington can plausibly say, we showed up, they refused, the world saw who was serious. That is not meaningless. But it still leaves one structural problem unsolved. Every round of pressure seems to bring Iran to the same place, hurt enough to negotiate, but not broken enough to accept the terms Washington wants. That is the real dilemma. America is trying to force a decisive diplomatic result against a country that still has oxygen. As long as China keeps that oxygen system alive, pressure can intensify without becoming decisive. That is why the next 48 hours matter so much. There are 3 signals to watch. First, whether China says anything specific about the seized ship, not general talk about peace, something specific, if it stays silent. Ambiguity still serves Beijing better than confrontation. Second, whether Wang Yi calls Arakchi again before Wednesday. If he does, Beijing may have decided a deal now serves it better than continued limbo. If he does not, then Beijing likely still prefers the current unresolved structure. Third, what Iran actually does, not what one spokesman says. If a delegation still arrives, diplomatic Iran won for now. If nobody comes, the hardline camp won. And if the hardline camp wins while China stays silent, then you have your answer. China's silence was not empty. It was the loudest signal in the negotiation. Not because Beijing spoke, because it chose not to. And in a war like this, that choice is never neutral.